Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And very good morning. So right now we're going to start a new topic, that is chapter 3, working capital management and short-term financings. So in this chapter 3, what we're going to learn is we're going to learn how to manage current asset as well as manage the short-term financing or current liability lah. Okay. So basically working capital management ni consists of current asset minus with current liabilities. So you akan dapat working capital. Another name for working capital is the net current asset. Okay. So apa kita akan belajar? In 3.1 we're going to learn the introduction to working capital management. 3.11 working capital terminology. 3.1.2 risk return trade-off. 3.2 strategies in working capital management, di mana strategi dia 3, that are hedging principle, aggressive principle as well as conservative approach. And later 3.3 we're going to learn the cash conversion cycle. Then only we're going to learn about the short-term financing, that is current asset and current liabilities. So dekat current asset ni akan ada marketable securities, account receivable, inventory and cash. Whereas dalam current liabilities ni kita akan belajar pasal sources, that is unsecured sources as well as secured sources. And then kita akan belajar pasal cost of short-term financing. So ada 5 subtopics all together. So kat sini akan ada banyak jugalah kira-kira, okay. Dalam final dia akan keluar part B, question 2. So, learning outcome. At the end of this topic, the student should be able to apply the managing working capital principles and provide advice and make decision on the amount of working capital to be utilized by the firm. Yeah, 3 yang you all should know after you all learn this topic. So now let's go to the 3.1, introduction to working capital management. Okay, sebelum kita pergi dengan lebih mendalam, okay, ingat tak dalam chapter 2 you all belajar pasal financial manager. So function financial manager ada 3 kan, iaitu in term of financing, investing and asset management. So dalam investing tu dia kan ada working capital investment. So sekarang kita tengah nak belajar dengan lebih detail the functions of financial manager. So function of financial manager, one of it is managing the working capital. Okay. So macam I told you earlier, working capital ni also referred as net current asset, and it can be defined as current asset minus with current liability. So in order for the firm to be liquid or solvent, the net current asset must be positive. So working capital involved in financing and managing the assets of the firm, current asset and current liability lah. Okay. So second, to ensure working capital ni, to ensure to have good balance between asset and current liabilities, the firm can prosper and operate smoothly. Apa maksudnya? Okay. Refer to the page 108. Okay. 109. Under the risk return trade-off in working capital management. Okay. So apa itu risk return trade-off ni? Risk return trade-off related to trade-off between firms liquidity and profitability. So ada 2 lah bila kita kata pasal risk return trade-off ni, it will relate with liquidity and profitability. So apa itu liquidity? Maksudnya kekerapan untuk dikonvertkan into cash. Right? So di mana liquidity and profitability ni dia ialah inverse relationship. Bila firm's liquidity increase, the profitability of the firm will decrease. Macam mana? Okay, you tengok, you refer page 109 tu, dia punya explanation, the first paragraph. Dia kata firm can increase its investment in working capital by increased investment in current asset. So bila firm increase their investment in working capital dengan cara increasekan dia punya current asset, firm's liquidity akan increase juga. However, may not result in increase in firm's returns if profit remain unchanged. Okay, sebab tu dia ada inverse relationship. Therefore, financial manager has to determine balance between liquidity and profitability that would contribute positively to the firm's value. Itu maksud dia have good balance, okay, between current asset and current liability. So next, effect to risk return trade-off, okay, which means that company must know the risk that will be faced by the firm and the return that the firm might be earned. Okay, refer balik the second paragraph. Okay, so dia kata use of current versus long-term investment. Long-term fund, maksudnya current and non-current ni involved in risk return trade-off. Di mana kalau the higher use of non-current funds, the lower the risk of insolvency. Maksudnya kalau kita guna long-term punya fund, dia company tu might be more liquid lah. Okay, whereas the more the use of current asset, the higher the risk of insolvency and higher return. Okay, kita tulis lah. So, okay, kalau guna non-current investment, it will lead to lower insolvency ataupun higher more liquid lah. Okay, higher liquidity. Ya Allah, liquid and then low return. So company kena tahulah the effect of risk return. Untuk setiap investment dia boleh tahu apa risk dia, apa return yang akan dia dapat. Okay, so effect untuk firms net current asset pula ialah liquidity higher, profitability lower lah. Kalau lower firms net current asset, maksudnya dia banyak menggunakan short term financing and less long term financing, profit akan jadi higher. Why? Sebab short term fund have lower rate of interest than long term. Okay, over shorter time period. However, firms' risk of insolvency is higher, as short term have to be repaid earlier and more frequently than long-term funds. So itulah efek dia. Kalau firms ada high net current asset, dia akan jadi lebih liquid tapi low profitability. Dan kalau lower, vice versa lah. Itu yang pertama. And now let's move to the factors affecting working capital level. So ada 4 factors that will be affecting the working capital level. Maksudnya apa yang akan effect dia ialah kalau company tu memerlukan high current asset lah. Okay, let's move to types of business. Type of business, retail and manufacturing firm have higher working capital as compared to service firm. Kenapa? Why? Because retail manufacturing ni dia ada banyak inventory. Nak dikomparekan dengan service dia tak ada inventory yang banyak. That's why working capital untuk retail manufacturing firm akan jadi higher as compared with other business. Okay, second factor is sales volume. The higher the sales volume, the higher the working capital involved. Okay, sebab dia banyak current asset. Third factor is seasonality. Festive seasons will require higher working capital. Okay, sebagai contoh, let's say kita buka retail. Okay, so kita buka supermarket lah. Bila hari raya je, of course kita akan stok kita punya inventory banyak sebab orang akan beli. Okay, that's why festive season we require higher working capital. So the fourth factor is length of operating and cash cycle. The longer the operating and cash cycle, the higher its working capital. Maksudnya daripada cash tu, dia akan beli dari supplier. So dia pun baru akan jual kepada customer. Lepas tu barulah dia akan convert pada cash balik. Tu cash cycle. Dia akan convert from cash to cash. So bila operating cycle tu longer, working capital dia akan jadi higher lah sebab dia cap banyak current asset. Okay, so these are the factors that will be affecting the working capital level. So next, let's move to the classification of asset. Okay, so asset can be classified into two types of asset that are permanent asset and temporary assets. So apa itu permanent asset? Permanent asset is an investment in asset expected to be held more than 1 year. Whereas temporary asset, current asset that can be converted into cash quickly. Okay, so dalam permanent asset, kita akan ada permanent current asset as well as non-current asset. Obviously lah, non-current asset ni kan sebab dia akan use more than 1 year. So maksudnya dalam current asset, kita akan ada permanent and temporary. Okay. So, permanent current asset ni is current asset at its lowest level, always available in the firm. Contoh macam petty cash lah. Okay. Petty cash kan kita akan sentiasa, contoh petty cash kita 500. So, hari-hari kita memang akan ensure yang duit kita memang akan ada 500. Okay. Untuk easy kan dia punya jual beli lah. Right. Inilah contoh permanent asset tu. Permanent current asset. Okay. Lepas tu, let's move to the classification of sources of financing. So, source of financing ada 3, iaitu permanent sources, temporary sources and spontaneous sources. So, permanent sources is financing with maturity period more than 1 year. Okay. Bila kita ada permanent asset, kita pun ada permanent sources, permanent financing. Example permanent dia ialah long term debt, preferred stock, bonds and common stock. Okay, kita pun ada temporary asset kan. Temporary asset consists of current asset. Current asset consists of permanent and temporary. Okay. So, temporary sources ni is a short-term financing including current liabilities. So, that is maturity period within 1 year to temporary sources. Ni more than 1 year, permanent, temporary, within 1 year. So, example temporary sources is commercial paper, unsecured bank loans, loans secured with account receivable and inventories. These are example of temporary sources. That is the spontaneous sources. Spontaneous sources is a short-term financing but arise spontaneously in firms' day-to-day business. For example, trade or account payable and accrual. Yang selalu datang lah. Secara tiba-tiba dia memang selalu ada, daily ada. So, account payable dia memang akan wujud kan. So, these are the 3 sources of financing. Okay. So, inilah 3.1. Introduction to working capital. Next kita akan go to 3.2. Kita nak tahu alternative working capital financing policies. Untuk kita tahu 3.2 ni, you kena faham ni lah. Sources ni permanent sources, temporary sources, spontaneous sources, and permanent asset, temporary assets. Okay. So now let's move to the 3.2.